I had education geared towards this. This is what I knew I wanted to do early on. And I don't know why. I think it was just because it was an opportunity offered to me. It wasn't that I was pushed into anything, but my father encouraged me because he said, hey, this is an opportunity. We have a family, a brand that you may be interested in being a part of and continuing on. And I don't know, I just liked the idea of being around the funeral home. And, we all started out mowing grass and washing cars, and you did too. All my kids actually had to do jobs like that.
Well, I always tell people I still don't know if this is what I want to do. Because I didn't go to school for this. Now that I've kind of changed roles and been taken on working with families, I've started to value the real values and things that you get out of this job that I didn't see, obviously, when I was mowing yards and painting fences and scrubbing.
So what you're really saying is I shouldn't have made you mow grass.
Yeah.
I ruined it for you.
Well, I'm here still, aren't I?
You still are. Well, I don't know much about John S. Dykstra other than he actually, as I understood it, bought the business from Mr. Alberti, John Alberti.
He had glassware, sold dishes, houseware kind of things on 8th Street. Yeah. And then he kind of partnered with Mr. Alberti. Mr. Alberti wanted to retire. I think he ended up retiring in 1900. John ended up buying the undertaking, as it was then, business from Mr. Alberti. Back in the early days, in the late 1800s, the state didn't require a license for having an undertaking business. I think that was more of a side business than an actual paying business. But as the community grew and obviously more people were passing away, there was a bigger need for that business, and then the state required to have a license, and I know John's number was number 55 in the state.
I do know that, the practice of the funeral part evolved. My grandpa would talk about, and my dad would talk about how they would go load everything in a car, and if there was a death, you went to the house. And you did this. Now this is something that was evolved, but you would do all the prep work in the house. And the next day you'd come back and you'd bring a casket and place the casket. You do your casketing, and then you would have what was considered a wake in the house. And then later on, the next day you take the body to the church and you have a service in the church. And then following that, you'd have this big meal in the house. So that was like a 3 or 4 day event. But those are the days when people lived on farms, they lived in the same community. Now it's not like that anymore.
We think of Holland then like Holland today. Holland was this little community of a few streets, and everything else, like 30th Street, there was an orchard where First Reformed Church is. People would come from Grand Rapids to Holland for a funeral, and the family
would provide a dinner before they
provided a lunch for them before they went home, because that was a huge outing for them. Yeah. And that's where what we like to lovingly refer to, the Dutch lunch of ham on a bun.
Oh gosh.
So where now I think you just kind of carry on those traditions. Yeah, it's just really cool to see where it's come from to where we are now. And I'm sure in generations to come, they're going to look back at us and go, "Guy, can you believe they did it like that all those years ago?"
Julius was a mechanic, and he worked on cars. Cars were just coming out, and so having a mechanic on staff, that's how I understood he started in the funeral business, and worked for worked with Gil Vandewater for Mr. Dykstra. And then eventually what happened, Gil passed away and Julius was the only one left, and he had 3 boys that all got into the business.
I had absolutely no idea what Vic did when I married him. It was like no other business. You know, he went to work, but he worked a lot.
Okay, so you had a busy week going on last week when we were rescheduling and all that stuff, and you sent me and Ricky
A zillion texts.
Well, you guys, one of them was a poem.
Did I actually send you the poem?
This is probably something that you received before you got married to Dad.
Yeah.
But it reads, meals get put on hold, vacations canceled, babies waiting to be born. It's not a typical retail business with set hours. It's 24/7.
It is 24/7. At one of my bridal showers, Grandma gave me this board. It was kind of like a decoupage board. It had a little poem on it, the life of a funeral director's wife. And it's so very true.
We didn't even own a car when we got married because he could walk to work. So, but I really had no idea what he did when he went to work. He was very professional, but then again at night he'd get his professional look off. So he had 2 sort of personalities, but no, I think he was very good. And a lot of people called him Mr. Dykstra instead of Mr. Kleinheksel.
I don't think it'd be smart to change the name.
Well, and really, Dykstra to Kleinheksel.
Let's face it.
Let's face it, I think
easier to
Dykstra
spell, probably,
is a little
Dykstra.
easier to spell.
Probably easier to say.
Yeah, and you know,
It
yeah.
shows up in the phone book before Kleinheksel.
Well, there you go.
I always remember Dad, he really enjoyed what he did too.
He did. He didn't want to do anything else.
No,
That was his.
It was his thing. Yeah,
He enjoyed it.
yeah. I never felt like that he didn't have time for us. He always made time. If he could, he might not be on time, but he would be at all my sporting events. He would, it was always important to him. And it was important to my mom that they supported whatever we were involved in. I could see him in the crowd because he was the guy with the white shirt on. He was always the guy, probably a little overdressed in the crowd.
What's really nice about this family is just the fact that, you know, business was obviously important, but family was more important. And, you know, if you couldn't be there, you found ways to take me along too, like to coffee. You know, and I do that with my kids too. You find ways to bring them to work so that you can spend time with them if you missed something else.
And they'll appreciate that later on. They'll be talking about that later on, about how you did that. They'll never forget that.
You were, I don't want to say unexpected. We'd been trying to have kids for a long time and went through the adoption process and adopted Carrie and Katie. And then when Katie was about a year old, we found out we were going to be having a baby. You were born in December, just like all of your kids are. And I called Dad at noon and said, "Hey, we're going to have a baby born today." And so Dad and I went to the hospital, and I remember Grandpa called and said, hey, we have a death call, and it's in, I believe it was Saugatuck.
Yeah, you're right.
And yeah, see how well I remember that? And that was almost 36 years ago. And so Dad just kind of looked at me and said, what do you think? You know, we have a death call. And I said, you're going to have to go. So he did. But
Did you make it back in time?
Yeah,
as it turns out, you weren't born until Wednesday morning. So even in those situations, you know, there's somebody else that needs you. And you have to understand that being married, you know, to that your husband belongs to you, but doesn't always belong to you. I think you have to love being with people to do what you guys and what our family does.
When you go to work in the morning, you're not sure exactly what you're going to be doing, and it's a variety of things. There's always something to be done. Fixing something on the building that's broke, or meeting a family, or working in the back. It's very unique, and it's never boring. Correct? Okay. I just like the camaraderie. I like the meetings in the morning when we get together and we sit down, discuss what happened last night, how could, you know, what we did yesterday, how can we do it better. It's challenging, so every day is a challenge, and to do it better the next day. I like the challenge, I guess.
We've been so incredibly fortunate with the staff that we have.
And it's not just that core group of people, it's also, we have a great support staff. We have secretaries that come in every day, and they're the first people that talk to our families, and first impressions are really important.
We all come from pretty different backgrounds, like, and different cultures, and which helps us immensely, you know, as we grow, and but working with the community, because the community is all different cultures, and it's great that we have, you know, representation of those cultures within our staff.
Certainly wasn't something that I had made a conscious decision that that's what we needed to do to diversify our staff, but sure did work out well.
Yeah.
It's a ministry. It's something where they care, but they also know that in order for them to do a good job, they have to separate emotions from
Right.
their job.
Somebody loses their husband, I can relate and I can empathize with them, but I still have you next to me.
We had the ambulance business, and as a young kid, I helped out with the ambulance. And there were some things that made me grow up a little faster, I think. It was an eye-opener for me.
Things that maybe you saw, or just
Yeah,
experiences
things that I experienced, drownings and things like that as a young high school kid. That was tough to see. Not everybody can do that. So when I first started, they were just getting into EMTs, emergency technicians, and then there were different levels when we were starting to administer drugs. Yeah, it was an exciting time for a young kid. My father would tell me that the ambulance part typically kind of evolved from taking mothers home from the hospital. You had an ambulance take you home.
Back then, it was really, they weren't EMTs.
No,
they just would pick up the person from an accident and rush them to the hospital. They were basically just transportation.
My dad said that we had one of the first lights, emergency lights in Michigan on our car. So even the cars evolved. You didn't necessarily buy an ambulance, you bought a car and converted it into an ambulance. And why it was tough was because, you know, you just had enough staff. You would start a service, and then all of a sudden you'd get an ambulance call. Next thing you know, the guys that were working for your service were were taken off on an ambulance call. That happened a fair
That
amount.
happened.
Yeah. And then, so when we got a chance to sell out, that was kind of I think that was a good thing.
But I also remember our telephone number at the funeral home was 1 digit off from Russ's, and Grandpa a lot of times would be getting calls for takeout orders from Russ's. And there was one time, I think, that he was just so tired of getting the calls all the time. He said, "Okay, what's your order?" And the person just started rattling off all the Dutch twin burger and blah blah blah. And that
I wonder if Russ has ever received any ambulance calls.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question.
Possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
We saw a fair amount of train accidents and car accidents, speeding accidents, a lot of farming accidents and things. There were several calls that I remember, drownings and things like that, that really left an impact on me too. And my dad was always like, be careful. He never wanted me riding motorcycles, and he was always concerned about it. If you're on the pier or something like that, don't do anything dumb. And now I get it, It takes some wisdom to learn some of those things. As a young kid, you take it for granted. But, that big lake is a dangerous place.
Something I appreciated growing up is, because you see accidents firsthand and you've seen parents lose their kids or spouses, and you heard the stories of how they left and maybe they were in an argument.
Yeah.
And I always appreciated, in our family, it seemed like, hey, never leave the house upset. Always say you're sorry. Nothing is more important. There's no argument that's worth it.
I hear lots of good compliments about my family, so I'm glad.
Yeah, family is definitely it's a unique business to work with your family, and you got to realize too. You leave your work at home. And more than once I've said, "Dar, let's not talk about it at home," because you don't want to be doing that all the time.
It's easy to continue the conversation
Yeah.
once you walk through your doors at
Yeah,
home, and sometimes you should end the conversation. So
Unfortunately, we live in different houses.
Yeah,
so-
that's a
yeah.
good thing.
So do you feel like you want to see more Kleinheksels
Absolutely.
doing this job?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Why not? Well, first of all, what you have to remember is that I didn't see you coming. I didn't know if you were going to be a part of this business or not. And so I was looking down the road thinking I was going to be the last Kleinheksel. And that gives you a funny feeling because you feel like you're kind of selling out to the family, that you are going to be the one that closes the door or takes sells out. And so when I found out that you were interested in coming back and taking over, that made me feel like it was all worthwhile. And to think that maybe one of my grandchildren, whether it's a grandson or granddaughter, could be a part of that, it's a real, it's a real gift to give a business that's growing, and to think that your family's going to take over, that's very important to me.
This is such a unique business. It's not for everyone, and to let each person make that decision whether or not it is for them or not, I really valued that, and if we can offer that to my kids or any other of your grandkids, and not push them, but let them make that decision for themselves, I think that would be nice. But we won't know.
It was hard not to do that,
as you get older and you're married to the business longer, you really understand. And it does get a little emotional sometimes. And, as you experience more deaths with family or friends, you understand that this job is really important. It's important to people.
You know, our business doesn't change a whole lot. It's all about helping people. When people say to you, you know, that was just what I needed, or you were really there when I needed you. There's something about that feeling that until you have that, you don't understand. And I'm sure you get that where you're talking to families that my dad talked to at some point, and they probably say, I remember your dad or your uncle. And I mean, that continuity is valuable.